The other day, a woman asked if I would sign my book, No Greater Love. I said I'd be honored to do that. And then she pulled out her iPad. And she said, well, it's an e-book. And I wasn't exactly sure how to sign an e-book. And so we grabbed a picture of that. I'm so old school, I still think of books like this. Well, this particular book is actually an anthology of communion stories. When my father retired after 40 years of ministry, I interviewed some of his former members and asked, what do you remember best about my dad? Over and over, people said, what we remember are his communion stories. I too have very fond memories of my dad, and I loved communion Sabbaths because my dad would skip the long sermon and instead just tell a story that would illustrate the atoning sacrifice of Jesus at Calvary. And I loved those communion Sabbaths. And so this week we have a special guest. If you're visiting here or if you're looking for a church family, we would love to have you as a part of this spiritual community. And we have some copies at the information desk. If you want to take home today's communion story, you can do that. It is in this book. Apparently they are not selling so well, so now we just give them away. A limited number, of course. Well, I naturally dedicated this book to my dad. I wrote to my dad, Pastor Cliff Haffner, who not only told many of these cherished stories, but lived them. Dad, your life has been a consistent and convincing sermon of sacrifice, grace, and love. There is no man on earth that I respect more than you. And today, June 30, will always be a melancholy mark for me in the calendar, as it was exactly 1 year ago today that my father passed away. And so I thought that it would be appropriate for communion today to share probably his favorite story to tell from this book. It's a story about freedom or lack thereof and independence. Again, I felt appropriate this Sabbath before we all celebrate our freedom and independence on July 4 this week. Also, because we are in a series right now working our way through the book of Romans. And I think this passage where we land today is particularly appropriate for communion. Romans chapter 3. Beginning in verse 22, Paul writes, "This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew or Gentile." And of course, we have heard Paul reminded us of this repeatedly over the past few weeks, that we're all the same. That is to say, we have all sinned. All fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by His grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. And today we gather together around the Lord's table to celebrate this atoning sacrifice of Christ. God presented Christ, Paul says, as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of His blood to be received by faith. And so today we remember His mangled body on the cross. We remember His spilled blood for us at the cross. But first, the story. Auschwitz. Just the word evokes visceral angst, doesn't it? 1.3 million innocent people slaughtered at the German death camp. The very name brings images of torture and death and darkness. But from this dungeon of despair shines what Pope Paul VI would later describe as the brightest and most glittering figure, referring to Maximilian Kolbe. Born Raymond Kolbe on January 8, 1894, this brilliant young man joined an order of friars in 1907. It was there that he adopted his new name, Maximilian. As a friar, he studied at Gregorian Institute, earning 2 doctoral degrees, one in theology, one in philosophy. During World War II, he gave refuge to thousands of Polish refugees until the Gestapo arrested him on February 17, 1941. They sent him to Auschwitz, and he became known by his new name, prisoner number 16770. Now, a few years ago, Alexei Kucharski, a fellow prisoner of Kolbe's at Auschwitz, gave a presentation at the La Sierra Seventh-day Adventist Church in California. I want to share with you some of what he said in that presentation. He said, at the time of Kolbe's arrival, I didn't know that he was a priest who had served in Japan, or that he was the editor of the periodical Night of the Immaculate. To me, he was just another prisoner. Soon, however, the priest's unflagging efforts to be of help to other prisoners caught my attention. His exceptional sensitivity toward others made me wonder, who is this man? Conditions in the camp were subhuman. Adequate food not provided, the water was not pure, proper sanitary procedures were not followed. Still, says Kucharski, in the squalor of unthinkable suffering, Kolbe was a powerful shaft of life and light in the darkness of that camp. Kucharski remembers one time when Kolbe buckled under the weight of a heavy load of wood. He was beaten within a strike of his life, dumped to die in the camp hospital. He got a Polish doctor who was very sympathetic to Kolbe, recalls how Kolbe would share his meager rations of food. "You are so young," Kolbe would say to others. He said, "Here, you have my soup." And so he would surrender his watery soup to another patient, insisting, "You must survive, you drink it." Teetering on the edge of death, weighing less than 100 pounds, he could have slept in a hospital bed, but he chose not to. Again, Dr. Diem said Kolbe wanted to leave his bed to someone whose lot was worse than his. Kolbe was discharged from the hospital. On that day, a prisoner escaped during labor duty. The siren sounded, search parties hunted for the fugitive. All of the POWs were reminded, if the escapee is not found within 24 hours, 10 of the 600 men in Kolbe's Block 14 would be randomly selected and then tortured to death as retribution. Kucharski recalls the prisoners of Block 14, he said, were corralled for the morning roll call. They stood all day in the scorching sun awaiting death for 10 unlucky victims. At 6 p.m., the camp commander, Colonel Fritsch, announced that the runaway had not been found. He would then select 10 prisoners to pay for the crime. They would be escorted to Block 13, where they would be executed by starvation. Moving through the living skeletons, Colonel Fritsch would bark, "You," and then they would be taken away. One Polish soldier cursed to die was Francis Gdauniczek. When ripped from the ranks, he exclaimed, "Oh, my poor wife, my poor children, I shall never see them again." And Kolbe heard him say that. As the 10 men were removed from the ranks, Father Kolbe stepped forward. "What does that Polish pig think he's doing?" barked Fritsch, the colonel. Kolbe approached him, and he said, "May it please the Longerführer, I want to take the place of one of these prisoners," pointing to Gdauniczek, saying, "I am alone in this world. I have no family. He has family. Let me take his place." No. But then he reconsidered. and said, "Are you crazy?" And Kolbe insisted, "No, I just want to take his place." And finally, Fritsch said, "Very well, you may." An eyewitness later reflected, "We couldn't understand what was happening. It made no sense. Why would a man do such a thing? Who is this priest anyway? What is he thinking?" And yet, as surreal as it was, Father Kolbe joined the ranks of the condemned. He volunteered to lay naked in Block 13 on the cement floor with other sufferers who over the course of the next 2 weeks would inevitably slide from delirium into death. All the while, Kolbe would comfort them with assurances that God had not forsaken them. One of the SS guards remembered the details of Kolbe's death. He would later say the 10 condemned to death went through terrible days. From the underground cell in which they were shut up, there continually arose this echo of prayers and canticles. Since they had grown very weak, the prayers became but whispers. At every inspection, when almost all the others were now lying on the floor, Father Kolbe was always standing in the center of the cement slab, sometimes kneeling, as he looked cheerfully, even joyfully, into the face of an SS guard. He went on to write, Father Kolbe never asked for anything and never complained. Rather, he encouraged the others, saying that, who knows, maybe the fugitive would be found and they would all be set free. One of the SS guards remarked, "This priest, he really is a good man. We've never seen anything like him before." 2 weeks passed. Meanwhile, one after another died. The last of the 10 men still alive, Maximilian Kolbe. But they needed Block 13 for other purposes, and so they sent someone to the block to inject Father Kolbe with carbolic acid in the vein of his left arm. One of the officers, observing all of this, would later write, Father Kolbe, with a prayer on his lips, himself gave his arm willingly to the executioner. Unable to watch this, he says, "I had to leave. I left under the pretext of work still to be done. Immediately after the SS men had left, I returned to that cell where I found Father Kolbe leaning in a sitting position against the back wall with his eyes open and his head drooping sideways. His face was calm, radiant. Back in Block 14, Gajownicek struggled to come to grips with what Father Kolbe had done for him. He cried uncontrollably. He refused to eat until a fellow inmate said to him, "Take hold of yourself. Is the priest to die for nothing?" Gajownicek determined that Kolbe's gift would not be given in vain. He would survive. He must live. Gajownicek did outlive the death camp. He died March 13, 1995 in Poland at the age of 95. After the war, Gajownicek returned to his hometown with the dream of being reunited with his family. He did find his wife, but both of their sons were killed in the war. He never, of course, would forget the sacrifice of Dr. Kolbe, that ragged monk, his starving Savior. So every year on August 14, the anniversary of Kolbe's death, he made a personal pilgrimage. 53 years, every year, he went to Auschwitz. He wanted to pay homage to the man who had died for him. Well, today, through the symbols of the Lord's Supper, we too take a pilgrimage to Calvary to remember the sacrifice of our Savior's broken body and his spilled blood. Earlier, we washed one another's feet, reminding of ourselves on that night how Jesus modeled how, in fact, he did not come to be served, but rather he came to serve. And so, as we receive the symbols of the Lord's table just now, we have a few minutes, and I would encourage all of you to serve one of our own in a special way. You will notice that the pews have been stocked today with a lot of pins and blue cards. Many of you know Jerry Taylor, who sacrificed 30 years of ministry in this place, and we are so indebted to him around here for the music that he has given us through the years. And you may also know that Jerry is battling cancer. And so we thought that we wanted, in some small way, to just pay tribute to all that he has given of his life to this church and the community of faith that we enjoy around here, and that maybe we could just write him, all of us, a blue card. And so as you're receiving the grape juice and the wafers, they will be brought to you. I just encourage you to, even now, if you want to just grab that blue card and a pen and just write him a memory, write him a thank you or something that you recall, a way that he has impacted your life, just a very small way for us to serve somebody who we love around here. And then, you know, it is our custom every communion Sabbath to collect a benevolent offering. This offering is used to help church members in crisis, and as you're giving a generous offering on your way out, you can also drop that blue card to Jerry Taylor in that offering plate as well. But at this time, I would invite the elder who will facilitate our communion service now, Adam Brown, to come forward, as well as Pastors Jason and Alex, as together we participate at the Lord's table.